Hey, welcome back, everyone. We're sitting here with Se-Hoon Kim, director of the Captive Nations Coalition of the Committee on Present-Endangered China. We're going to be talking about the Chinese Communist Party's abusive policies towards other countries. Se-Hoon Kim, it's a real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you.
Now, you've been working on this coalition of these captive peoples of China. Tell us how this works or what you're working on.
So the Captive Nations Coalition, or the CNC, as with its own acronym, it's made up of folks that have been taken over and were specifically oppressed by the Chinese Communist Party over the last 70 years, I would say, since its founding. So we represent those who are in the United States as well as those who are outside of the United States, trying to get their voices heard to the international world.
Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo actually tweeted out a photo with some of you folks on there talking about this, actually. And it was interesting to see because this is a very different way of presenting the human rights abuses of the Chinese Communist Party, because we know that they invaded Tibet and they invaded Hong Kong now as well. And they invaded, for example, southern Mongolia, Inner Mongolia. And we see now that these are kind of isolated incidents. The idea of uniting them under one issue is a very unique stance. Now, I'm curious, how did this coalition come together?
Well, the coalition came together, I would say, since the foundation of the CCP itself. It never was really united, to a point that it is today strategically. And what I mean by strategically is that, since we have this blessings of technology and the fact that there is a closer community awareness now. For example, with what's happening to the people of East Turkestan, or what is known as the Uyghur issue, people are becoming a lot more aware in that regard. So in terms of the general awareness, in terms of the general information that's out there, these communities are a lot more united than ever before, and they have the need to do that. Every single one of these communities have now come to realize that if we do not unite and do something in order to get our voices heard, we are going to be silenced forever. So with all of that together is how this coalition came about. And the Committee on Present-Endangered China decided this is the platform that we need to provide to the folks from these captive nations so that not only their voices can be heard, but a realistic action can be taken in order to ensure that there is true freedom that will be enjoyed in the future. So,
now, when you met with Pompeo, what was the message you presented to him on this group?
So, Secretary Pompeo, first and foremost, was extremely sympathetic. He was also extremely, very, very genuine about just meeting each and every single one of us. I was actually inspired. Also, I was also very happy, extremely happy that he took the time to hear from each and every single member of the Captive Nations group. So we had a representative from Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, and another gentleman who represented Kazakhstan, which is a huge Belt and Road Initiative project nation by the Chinese Communist Party, and is one of the most important countries in order for that initiative to come into fruition into the future. So we presented all these cases in terms of why this needs critical attention and why this is important to the United States and really to the rest of the world. He listened very, very carefully, and he also said this is something that is much needed. And he said to us that this is an initiative that is extremely important for all of us. And I interpreted that as something that is important to every single one of us, not only in the United States, but to the rest of the world. So that's at least the gist of the message that we received from Secretary Pompeo. And I would even say it's the most important thing to a certain degree.
Now, I'm curious, when it comes to the CCP, its agendas, and what this represents, you said this is the most important issue with China right now, one of the most important. And it's something important for the world as well. Why do you say it's important for the world, this issue?
Well, it is important for the world because, one of the things that the CCP does historically, they have done, I should say, is that every single place that they have taken over, per se, other than different parts of China. And I would even add that the Chinese people have been the first victims of the Chinese Communist Party. After they were done with them, they moved on to take over these other nations that were once independent and free. And they have tested out their oppression. Specifically, we see today slave labor, which is rampant, and which has unfortunately have driven the Chinese economy for a very, very long time. It's still going on today. And what is happening to the Uyghurs, for example, and Kazakhs and all the other Turkic people in what is known as Xinjiang. The mass surveillance system, for example, that's being exported all over the world. So if you look at it from that degree, you can't help but to wonder, is this going to reach our shores one day? And is this going to be affecting me and my family one day? And what will be the consequences that we have to pay at that time? And it scares you. And it scares you because all of these things that we thought were once a foreign issue will become a reality for us one day. So that is why I say it's one of the most important things, because this is a threat to literally every single one of us right now. And one of the things that the Captive Nations Coalition aims to do is to also provide a voice to all those individuals from the Belt and Road Initiative countries. As you know, the Belt and Road Initiative is what is known as a neo-colonialism effort by the CCP. And once they take over these areas after a series of episodes of countries not being able to pay back these massive loans that the CCP has given to them, or a takeover of a land because of a historical claim, like what's happening in Tajikistan, for example, right now. It serves as an example a lot more at that time, because now we see their expansion becoming a reality to sovereign nations. So by engaging with the captive nations, we want to also let the world know that as these countries were taken over in the past, when they were once free and independent, this could become a reality for all countries in the globe. And that is pretty scary. And that's really the message that, has been driving us till this day.
And this isn't far-fetched either. We know the Chinese Communist Party uses its abuses in, for example, Xinjiang, also called East Turkestan, as the testing ground for different types of authoritarian monitoring or other practices to keep the populations under control. And when they work there, they replicate them in other parts of China. And we also know, as you mentioned, when the Chinese Communist Party goes abroad and makes these business deals under the One Belt, One Road initiative, these technologies come within the package of that when they build the infrastructure. The idea that the Chinese Communist Party is spreading its model of government using East Turkestan or Xinjiang as one of the models, for example, of that type of oppressive government, and encouraging other governments in the world to follow that model. This really is an interesting point. It really is an image of the CCP creating its own system around the world. And maybe the front line of battle of this is these nations standing up against that and pushing back. Is this how you're viewing it? You mentioned this is one of the most important issues, that this is kind of like the drawing of the line in these countries themselves. Is this accurate?
Absolutely. And on top of that, I would even say that a large portion of the Captive Nations Coalition communities, whether they're Tibetans, Southern Mongolians, East Turkestanis, specifically Uyghurs and Kazakhs, or even just ordinary Chinese dissidents who are Falun Gong practitioners, Chinese Christians, or just individuals who just simply want democracy. Many of them are patriotic, not just towards the United States, but patriotic members of a free society. And to them, that's a really, really critical part in the continuation of their survival too. Because not only are they fighting for their own freedom, but they're also warning the world about what could come, what could become a reality, as it did for them. But also at the same time, they teach us, every single one of these folks at least have taught me and many, many people in the committee and elsewhere how important and how valuable the freedom that exists here in the United States and the rest of the free world. And in a way, the Captive Nations Coalition aims to spread that message to each and every one of us that, it doesn't matter what you are, it doesn't matter what political party you affiliate yourself with. At the end of the day, we're still part of this free society. And there are those who are telling us that this is an important part of humanity and that we must do everything that we can to protect the freedoms that we have in this country.
Now, I know you work, of course, very close with these people and the stories they're telling from within their own countries. And for a lot of people, I think people care about it, but for a lot of people, it's very distant. What is it a situation like on the ground in these countries based on the people you've spoken to?
Well, it's much worse than the narrative that we get from the general media. Fortunately, there are many investigative journalists like yourselves and many others around the world that have done their best to report on some of the oppression that goes on. When we talk about Tibet, right, you have mass surveillance, mass military presence, which is the same as East Turkestan, or otherwise known as Xinjiang. You hear from the Mongolian communities. For the first time, Mongolian people from all over the world have spoken out in unison against the Chinese Communist Party and what they're doing to the Mongol language and just identity. I mean, to them, this is a clear attempt to exterminate the Mongolian culture. And at least with the information that is being provided to these communities from the folks on the ground, people are saying, times what you know by 10. And that's how bad it is. They said, every morning we wake up and we're wondering, is this the day that I'm going to get arrested for speaking out against government policies that are trying to destroy people like me? You hear from those from Xinjiang or East Turkestan. They say they say the simple words, is my mother or father alive? My sisters are in concentration camp. I wonder if they're still breathing. So that's sort of, unfortunately, the gist of the stuff that we hear, right? And that's a gist of the truth that goes on, in these captive areas. When you talk to the folks from the Belt and Road Initiative nations like Nigeria or Kazakhstan or even Nepal, for example, one term always comes up, which is the term sovereignty. They say we are losing our sovereignty. Why? Because when the CCP actually demonstrate what they can do through these Belt and Road Initiative, project, they bring their own workers into their country. They don't hire any of the local workforce that's available there. Plus, they know for a fact that their government is corrupt, and henceforth will do anything that the CCP tells them in the future, as they have been doing right now. And so, consequently, what would happen is the people will have to be the ones paying the price for it. They won't be able to get jobs, and since there's pretty much a Chinese takeover of their ports, of their military bases, and even a large portion of their energy sectors, like it was in Sri Lanka, the people are wondering, well, we're Sri Lankans, we're Nepalis, we're Kazakhs, we're Nigerians, we're X, Y, and Z. Are we not going to be able to call ourselves that anymore? And there's a genuine fear among these communities of losing who they are eventually in the future, all in the name of prosperous friendship that the CCP offers. So it's a lot more troubling than we know, and it's a lot more troubling than we could ever imagine at this point. And that's why it's so critical that we at least start doing our research on these world communities right now.